The golden chandeliers hanging high above the ballroom sparkled like thousands of tiny stars, casting a warm yellow glow over the crowd below. It was the most important night of the year for the city's elite. The annual Grand Arts Gala. Outside the tall hotel windows, the city skyline was dark. But inside, everything was bright, loud, and expensive. Men wore tuxedos that probably cost more than a car, and women wore long flowing gowns that rustled softly when they walked. The air smelled expensive too, like heavy perfume, fresh flowers, and polished wood. At the front of the massive room, there was a stage. In the center of the stage sat a grand piano. It was a beautiful, shiny, black monster of an instrument, reflecting the lights like a mirror. This was the throne for the night's king, Julian Vane. Julian was famous. He was known all over the country as one of the best piano players alive. But if you asked the people who worked behind the scenes, they would tell you he was also one of the most difficult. He wasn't just a perfectionist. He was mean. He treated people like they were furniture, unless they had money or fame. Julian was currently sitting at the piano. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his tailcoat was crisp. He was warming up, running his fingers over the keys with a look that told everyone he was doing them a favor just by being there. The room was buzzing with low chatter. People were holding champagne flutes, chatting about their stocks, their vacations, and who was wearing what designer dress. They were waiting for the real show to start. In the corner of the room, far away from the champagne and the diamonds, the mood was very different. An elderly woman named Alina was working. She wore the hotel's standard cleaning uniform, a dark blue dress, with a white apron and sensible, comfortable shoes. She had a cart next to her filled with spray bottles, towels, and a trash bag. Her hair was tucked back under a net, and her face showed the lines of a life spent working hard. She moved quietly, trying to be invisible. Her job tonight was to make sure the room stayed perfect. She had to empty the ashtrays, wipe down the brass rails on the stairs, and make sure not a single speck of dust touched the floor. Alina was used to being ignored. In a room full of rich people, the cleaning staff is usually invisible. She didn't mind it. Actually, she preferred it. It let her watch. She had a secret love for these galas because of the music. While the guests gossiped about money, Alina watched the piano. She had loved music her whole life. It was the one thing that made the hard days feel lighter. She didn't know how to read music very well, but she knew how it felt. She could feel the rhythm in her chest. She was currently polishing a tall brass stand near the edge of the stage. It was a tricky spot because guests kept walking by, and she had to stop every time someone passed. She sprayed a little polish on the rag and began rubbing the brass in small circles. Squeak, squeak. The rag made a tiny noise against the metal. It wasn't loud, but in a room that was waiting for a famous pianist to play, it was noticeable. On stage, Julian heard it. He was in the middle of a quiet, complex scale when the sound broke his concentration. He hit a wrong note. His hands froze over the keys. The irritation on his face was instant. He didn't look like a concert pianist in that moment. He looked like a man who had just stepped in a puddle with his new shoes. He turned his head sharply, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Alina. Alina froze too. She saw him looking at her and immediately stopped polishing. She offered a small, apologetic smile and nodded her head, hoping he would just turn back around and play. But Julian didn't turn around. He saw an opportunity. The room had gone quiet, waiting for him to continue. He decided to use this moment to entertain the crowd in his own way. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he turned his body on the bench to face Alina. A smirk slowly spread across his face. It was the kind of smirk that makes you feel small, the kind that says asterisk-y and better than you. And everyone knows it. Asterisk, the guests near the stage stopped talking and watched. They sensed that something was about to happen. They loved drama almost as much as they loved money. Julian placed his fingers back on the keys. He started playing again, but it wasn't the beautiful classical piece from before. He began playing a clumsy, low, thumping rhythm. Thump, thump, squeak, thump. He was imitating the sound of Alina cleaning. He moved his body in an exaggerated, stiff way. jerking back and forth like a robot scrubbing a floor. A few nervous giggles came from the front row. Emboldened by the laughter, Julian went further. He started making cartoonish noises with his mouth while playing disjointed notes. Scrub, 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 he mumbled into the microphone, his voice dripping with mockery. He played a fast, messy run of notes that sounded like a bucket of water being spilled. Then, he slammed his hands down on the low keys with a loud, ugly bang. The laughter grew louder. It wasn't just nervous giggles anymore. People were chuckling openly. They were laughing because the famous pianist was making fun of the cleaning lady. They felt safe because they weren't the target. They felt superior. To them, it was just a joke. It was just a bit of comedy before the music started. Alina stood there, her hands still clutching the polishing rag. Her face turned a deep shade of red. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. She felt eyes on her from every direction, hundreds of eyes, judging her, laughing at her. She felt small. She felt dirty in her uniform compared to the gowns and suits surrounding her. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She looked down at her shoes, wishing she could just disappear. Julian stopped playing abruptly and let the silence hang in the air for a moment. He looked at the audience, enjoying his moment of power. Then he turned back to Alina. "I am trying to play masterpieces here," Julian said into the microphone, his voice smooth but sharp. "It is very hard to concentrate when I hear scrubbing noises. Perhaps you are confused. You see, this is a concert hall. We play music here. We do not clean the notes off the keys." The crowd laughed again, louder this time. A man in a tuxedo near the front clapped his hands slowly. Enjoying the show, Julian leaned back, looking very pleased with himself. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was the funniest person in the room. He didn't think about the woman standing 20 feet away. He didn't think about how hard she worked or how much she loved the piano he was sitting on. To him, she was just a prop, a character in his little comedy sketch. Alina tightened her grip on her cart. She felt a sting of tears in the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been through too much in her life to cry over a bully, even if he was famous. She took a deep breath and tried to steady her shaking hands. She looked back at Julian. For just a second, her eyes flashed. There was a fire in them that nobody noticed except Julian. It was a look of deep respect for the music he was playing, and a deep disgust for the way he was behaving. Julian saw the look. It wiped the smirk off his face for a split second. He didn't like being looked at like that. He was used to people looking at him with adoration or envy, not with quiet judgment. He sat up straighter and adjusted his cuffs. He decided he wasn't done yet. He was the king of this room, and he wasn't going to let a cleaning lady make him feel uncomfortable, even with just a look. "Actually," Julian said, his voice echoing through the ballroom, "since you are so interested in the piano, and you seem to know so much about how to handle it, why don't you come up here?" He patted the empty space on the bench next to him. The gesture was mocking, an invitation that wasn't meant to be accepted. It was a trap. If she said no, she looked rude. If she said yes, he would make a fool of her. "Come on," Julian pressed, leaning forward. "Don't be shy. You clearly have an opinion on how I should play. Perhaps you can do better? Or are you only qualified to clean up after the real artists are done?" The room went deadly quiet. The laughter stopped. It was suddenly awkward. The guests looked from the arrogant pianist to the humble cleaner. The hotel manager, who was standing near the back, started walking toward the stage with a worried look on his face. He knew this was crossing a line. This wasn't funny anymore. It was just cruel. But Alina didn't move. She stood rooted to the spot. She looked at the beautiful black piano, then at the sneering man sitting on the bench. She knew she should just walk away. She should go back to the kitchen and hide until the event was over. That was the smart thing to do. That was the safe thing to do. But something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the years of being invisible. Maybe it was the years of listening to people like Julian think they owned the world. Or maybe it was just the music itself, calling to her one last time. She looked at her hands, rough red and wet with polish. Then she looked at the ivory keys. The air in the room felt heavy. Everyone was waiting. Would she run? Or would she stay? The ballroom felt incredibly quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and presses against your ears. Everyone was looking at Alina. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the woman in the blue uniform, waiting to see what she would do. Just a minute ago, she had been invisible, a ghost moving through the shadows with a rag and a cart. Now, she was the only thing in the room that mattered. Julian sat on the bench, still tapping the ivory keys with a lazy rhythm. He had a smug look on his face, like a cat that had caught a mouse and was toying with it. He was confident she wouldn't come up. Why would she? He was the star of the show, a nationally known genius, and she was just someone who cleaned up messes. He expected her to look down, maybe mutter an apology, and rush away to hide in the kitchen. That was how the world usually worked. The loud, rich people won, and the quiet, working people faded away. But Alina didn't move her feet to run. She stood there, gripping the handle of her cleaning cart until her knuckles turned white. She felt a hot thumping in her chest, like a bird was trapped inside her ribcage trying to get out. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, but from the rush of adrenaline and humiliation. She looked at Julian's polished shoes, then up at his sneering face, and finally at the piano. It was a beautiful instrument. A 9-foot concert grand, shiny and black. It looked like a sleek, powerful beast waiting to be woken up. Alina knew what kind of sound that piano could make. She had heard it in her dreams for 40 years. She knew the weight of the keys and the smell of the felt inside. She knew because, in a different life, a life she had to leave behind when her parents got sick and the money ran out, she had spent 10 hours a day sitting at a bench just like that one, the hotel manager. A tall man with a worried frown finally reached her side. He leaned in close, speaking in a hurried whisper so only she could hear. "Maria," he whispered, using the name on her nama tag. "You don't have to listen to him. Please, just go back to the pantry. I'll handle this." "We don't need a scene." Lena looked at him. He was trying to help, trying to protect her from more embarrassment. But she couldn't move. She felt glued to the spot. She looked back at Julian. He was getting impatient now. The silence was stretching out too long, and it was making his joke feel awkward. "Well," Julian said, his voice booming through the speakers, "don't be shy. I'm offering you a master class. It's free of charge." Few people in the crowd chuckled nervously again. Someone muttered, "Just go, lady," from the back. But then another voice, a woman sitting near the front, whispered, "Leave her alone, Julian." The mood in the room was shifting. It wasn't just funny anymore. It was starting to feel uncomfortable. People were shifting in their seats, suddenly feeling a bit sorry for the older woman standing alone on the floor. Elena took a deep breath. She let go of the cart. It felt like letting go of a safety rail. She didn't look at the manager. She didn't look at the laughing guests. She looked straight at the piano. She remembered the feeling of her fingers dancing over the keys, the music drowning out the noise of the world, the problems, the hunger, the struggle. She remembered who she used to be before life forced her to become a cleaning lady. She lifted her chin. For the first time that night, she didn't look down at the floor. She stood up straight, her shoulders back. The fear was still there, bubbling in her stomach, but underneath it was a steel rod of determination. She wasn't going to let this man treat music like a toy. He might have the fame and the fancy suit, but he didn't have respect. And without respect, the music meant nothing. "Piano," Alina said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet room it carried clearly. It was rougher than the guests' voices, textured by years of work and smoke. But it was strong. Julian raised an eyebrow, mockingly surprised. "Yes, the piano. What about it?" Alina took a step closer to the stage. "The piano is the only thing in this room that doesn't need cleaning, Mr. Vane. It doesn't care about your suit or my uniform. It only cares about what you have to give it." The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath, like a wave pulling back from the shore. The guests looked at each other in shock. No one talked to Julian Vane like that, especially not the help. Julian's smile froze. His eyes narrowed. He didn't like being spoken back to, especially not in front of his fans. He felt a prickle of anger under his collar. He needed to put her back in her place, and fast. Soul. Julian laughed, but it was a harsh, barking sound without any real humor. He turned to the audience, spreading his arms wide. Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? The cleaning lady is going to lecture me on soul. That is adorable. Really. He swiveled back to Alina, his expression hardening. You think you know about soul? You think standing there with your rag gives you the right to critique me? I am Julian Vane. I have played in every major hall in this country. Who are you? I am a musician, Alina said softly. The words hung in the air. Or I was before the world decided I wasn't important anymore. Julian let out a loud, theatrical sigh. He slid further down the bench, making room, but he did it with a flourish that made it look like a dare. He patted the empty spot beside him aggressively. Okay then, Julian said, his voice dripping with challenge. Since you are such an expert, and since I am clearly doing such a terrible job, why don't you come up here and show us? He waved his hand toward the stairs leading up to the stage. Come on, don't be shy. The stage is open. Show me the soul you are talking about. Let's see if you can even find Middle C. The audience held their breath. This was it. The moment of truth. It was a trap and everyone knew it. If she went up there, she would humiliate herself. She probably didn't know how to play. She would press a key, make a horrible noise, and everyone would laugh. Julian would bow, the audience would applaud his wit, and Alina would be the laughingstock of the city. It was social suicide. The manager stepped forward again, his hand reaching out to grab her arm gently. Please, he begged. Don't do it. He will destroy you. Let's go. Lena looked at the manager's hand, then at the stage. She looked at Julian, who was smiling that cruel, tight smile. He thought he had one. He thought he had backed her into a corner where she had to surrender. But Alina didn't surrender. She felt a sudden calm wash over her. It was the same feeling she used to get right before a recital, the moment the fear turned into focus. She realized she had nothing left to lose. They already made fun of her. They already looked down on her. What was the worst that could happen? She goes back to cleaning floors? She was already doing that. She reached down and slowly pulled off her yellow rubber gloves. She peeled them off her fingers one by one, taking her time. She smoothed the front of her apron. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked toward the stage with slow, deliberate steps. Julian watched her coming, his smirk faltering just a fraction. There was something about the way she moved that made him uneasy. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like she was walking to a battle she intended to win. Alina climbed the 3 steps up to the stage. The carpet was thick and soft under her worn shoes. She walked across the wooden floor, the sound of her footsteps amplified by the microphone. She stopped right in front of the piano. It looked huge, towering over her. She looked at Julian. For a second, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with tension. I hope you have your earplugs ready, Julian whispered, leaning close so the microphone wouldn't pick it up. Because you are about to make a fool of yourself. Lena didn't answer him. She just looked him in the eye. Move, she said quietly. Julian blinked. He was used to people being nervous around him. He wasn't used to being commanded. He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket. He was going to enjoy this. He was going to stand right there and watch her crash and burn. He stepped aside with a bow that was mocking, sweeping his hand toward the bench as if he were a butler opening a door. Madame, he said, his voice sugary with fake politeness. Alina sat down on the bench. It was firm and comfortable. She placed her feet on the pedals. She was close enough to smell the expensive cologne on Julian, who was standing just a few feet away, leaning against the piano with his arms crossed. He was blocking her exit, looming over her like a vulture. The audience leaned forward. People put down their drinks. The waiter stopped in the aisles. The whole world seemed to shrink down to just that piano bench. Alina lifted her hands. They were rough hands, with short, bitten fingernails and red knuckles from scrubbing floors. They looked out of place, hovering over the pristine white keys. Julian looked at those hands and smirked. He was already thinking of the joke he would tell when she played the first wrong note. But Elena didn't play. She closed her eyes for a second. She took a breath. She wasn't thinking about the audience. She wasn't thinking about Julian. She was thinking about the song. It was a piece she played as a girl, a piece that made her feel like she could fly. She let the silence stretch out, letting the tension build until the room felt like it was going to snap. Then her hands dropped. The sound that exploded from the piano wasn't a clumsy thud. It was a roar. It was a crash of thunder that shook the chandeliers. Elena's fingers moved like lightning, striking the keys with a force that surprised everyone, even herself. She wasn't gently picking out a melody. She was attacking the piano with passion and fury. The notes flew fast and precise, a cascade of sound that filled every corner of the ballroom. Julian's smirk vanished instantly. His jaw dropped. He pushed himself off the piano, standing up straight. He stared at her hands, his eyes wide with disbelief. He knew this song. It was incredibly difficult. It was a song that even professional pianists hesitated to play. And this woman, this cleaning lady, was playing it perfectly. Asterisk, the sound that blasted out of the piano was not a soft trickle of notes. It was a thunderstorm. It was the revolutionary etude, a piece known for being incredibly difficult, fast, and angry. Elena's fingers were not just touching the keys, they were attacking them. Her left hand jumped up and down the lower end of the keyboard in a rapid Borlong-like pattern, while her right hand flew across the high keys like a blur. For the first 5 seconds, the room was in a state of pure shock. People who were mid-sip froze with their glasses halfway to their lips. The waiters stood like statues. Julian Vane, who had been leaning against the piano with a smirk, felt his body jerk upright. He pushed himself away from the instrument, his eyes widening as they locked onto Elena's hands. He knew this song. He played this song. It took him months of practice to get the speed right, and even then, he sometimes struggled with the endurance required to keep it loud and sharp. But Elena wasn't struggling. She was playing with a ferocity that was terrifying to watch. She wasn't sitting on the bench like a polite guest. She was owning it. Her body swayed slightly, her back straight, her shoulders loose. It was the sound of a lifetime of being unheard, suddenly screaming to be heard. Every key she struck felt like she was pushing back against every rude comment, every low wage, and every night spent cleaning up after people like Julian. The music was loud, aggressive, and beautiful. Julian's face went from pale to bright red. He looked at the audience, expecting them to laugh or boo, but they weren't making a sound. They were mesmerized. He looked back at Elena, his brain refusing to process what his ears were hearing. This was impossible. This was a trick. She had to be playing wrong notes, but he couldn't hear a single mistake. The runs were clean. The rhythm was perfect. The first minute of the song was a whirlwind. Then the music shifted. The angry storm settled into a melody that was heartbreaking and sad. Elena's right hand began to sing a slow, mournful tune, while her left hand continued to churn underneath. Like a dark river, this was the part of the music that separated the technicians from the artists. Julian could play the notes, but he usually played them with cold precision. He hit the right volume at the right time, but he didn't feel them. Elena felt them. As she played the slow melody, her expression softened. The anger in her jaw relaxed. For a moment, she didn't look like a cleaning lady in a uniform. She looked like a grandmother remembering her youth, like a lover remembering a heartbreak, like a human being pouring her soul into the wood and wires of the instrument. The audience felt it too. The rich guests stopped thinking about their money. They stopped noticing her worn shoes or her simple dress. They just watched and listened. A woman in the front row who had been laughing at Julian's jokes earlier suddenly reached up and touched a tear rolling down her cheek. The man next to her, a CEO who usually fired people without blinking, had his mouth open in awe. Julian, however, was not in awe. He was panicking. He stood a few feet away, feeling the sweat forming on his forehead. He looked small. He looked like a child who had stolen a toy and didn't know how to use it. He tried to cross his arms to look cool, but his hands were shaking. He realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he had made a terrible mistake. He had invited a lion onto the stage thinking it was a house cat. He watched her fingers. They were calloused and rough, but they moved with a grace that his smooth, pampered hands couldn't match. He saw the strength in her wrists. She wasn't using force to bang the keys. She was using weight and control, a technique that took decades to master. She hadn't practiced this in a day. She had lived this. The music swelled again, climbing back up to the high, chaotic notes. Elena's hands were moving so fast they looked like they were vibrating. The sound filled the massive ballroom, bouncing off the high ceilings and the crystal chandeliers. It felt like the piano was alive, breathing and roaring under her command. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at Julian. Her eyes were half closed, focused on something far away that only she could see. She wasn't performing for them anymore. She was playing for herself. She was playing for the girl she used to be, the one who had to drop out of school, the one who sold her piano to pay for medicine. She was playing for every dream she ever had to bury as the song raced toward its finale. The intensity became almost too much to bear. The notes were crashing down like waves on a rocky shore. Julian took a step back, actually intimidated by the sound. He realized that if he tried to sit down and play after her, he would sound pathetic. He would sound like a machine trying to follow a human. The final chords approached. Elena lifted her hands high and brought them down with force, playing the final, rolling thunder that ended the piece. And then, silence. She didn't lift her hands off the keys immediately. She let the last notes ring out, vibrating through the floorboards, through the bench, and into the air. She held her pose, her chest rising and falling, her hands hovering over the keys. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was heavier than the music had been. It was a respectful silence, the kind you give to something truly sacred. The mocking laughter from earlier was gone, vanished as if it never existed. Then, a sound came from the back of the room. It was the sound of one person clapping, slow, rhythmic, and loud. It was the hotel manager. He stood by the door, a huge smile on his face, clapping with all his might. That sound broke the spell. Suddenly, the entire room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar. People jumped to their feet, clapping their hands together so hard it stung. They shouted brava, an encore. A man in a tuxedo threw his jacket onto the floor in excitement. The woman who had been crying was wiping her eyes and clapping wildly. The energy in the room changed from snobbish and cold to electric and alive. They weren't clapping for a show. They were clapping for a miracle. Elena sat on the bench, her hands finally dropping to her lap. She looked up, blinking rapidly, as if she was waking up from a trance. The noise of the crowd hit her all at once. She saw hundreds of people standing. She saw their smiling faces. She saw them looking at her, not with disgust, but with admiration. Slowly, she stood up. She was a little shaky from the adrenaline rush. She smoothed her apron again, a nervous habit. She looked out at the crowd and gave a small, humble nod. She didn't bow like a performer. She nodded like a servant thanking her master, but this time the servants were the masters, and she was the queen. She turned to leave the stage. She wanted to get away. The spotlight was too hot, the noise was too loud, and her heart was beating too fast. She just wanted to go back to her cart and push it back to the safety of the kitchen, but she had to walk past Julian. He was still standing there, rooted to the spot near the piano. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions. He was embarrassed, angry, shocked, and strangely humbled. He looked at Elena as she walked toward him. Up close, he could see the moisture on her forehead from the effort of playing. He could see the reality of what had just happened. Elena stopped in front of him. She didn't look up at him with defiance anymore. She just looked tired. She looked at him the way she would look at a naughty child who had just broken a vase and realized they were in trouble. There was no hate in her eyes, just pity. Julian opened his mouth to say something. He wanted to say something witty, something to save his dignity. He wanted to make a joke about how she had practiced one song really well. But the words stuck in his throat. He looked at his own hands, then at hers. He realized that for all his fame and his fancy suits, he had never touched a piano the way she just did. He had never played with that kind of honesty. He swallowed hard. His face burned. He stepped aside, clearing the path for her. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. He was moving out of her way. Alina didn't say a word to him. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "Who's laughing now?" She just kept walking. She walked past the man who had mocked her, past the man who thought he was better than her, and descended the stairs from the stage. As her feet touched the ballroom floor, the applause grew even louder. It was a wall of sound washing over her. The hotel manager rushed over, beaming with pride, ready to escort her through the crowd. But Alina didn't look for an escape route anymore. She walked with her head up, carrying herself with a grace that no uniform could hide. She knew she had shocked everyone. She knew she had changed the way they saw her. But more importantly, she knew who she was again. She wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was a pianist. And she had just played the song of her life. Julian stood alone on the stage, the spotlight heating the back of his neck. But for the first time in his career, he didn't feel like the center of the universe. He felt like a prop that had been left behind after the show was over. The applause was still crashing against the walls of the ballroom like a tidal wave. But it wasn't for him. The energy in the room had shifted completely. The electric feeling that usually buzzed around him when he performed had moved across the floor to the woman in the blue uniform. He looked out at the crowd. They were still on their feet. Some people were craning their necks, trying to see where Alina had gone. Others were looking at the stage, but not at him. They were looking at the piano with a new kind of respect, as if the instrument itself had just revealed a secret. Julian felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He realized with a sickening clarity that no one would remember the piece he played earlier. The only thing they would remember from this gala was the cleaning lady. He took a step toward the piano bench. His legs felt heavy. He sat down, but it didn't feel right. The bench seemed to have shifted, or maybe he just felt smaller. He placed his fingers on the keys, intending to play something to win them back. He needed to prove that he was the professional, that he was the one with the degree and the fame. But when he pressed a key, the sound felt thin. It felt artificial. It sounded like a machine trying to mimic a bird, while Alina had sounded like the bird itself. He pulled his hands back. He couldn't do it. He couldn't follow that performance. Playing now would feel like an insult to the music. He sat there for a moment, staring at the ivory keys, feeling the sweat drying on his forehead. He had been humiliated, not by a prank, but by pure, undeniable talent. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and he had no one to blame but himself. Meanwhile, on the floor of the ballroom, Alina was walking toward the exit. The applause was deafening, ringing in her ears, but it felt distant, like she was underwater. She felt lightheaded. Her heart was still racing from the adrenaline of the performance. Her fingers tingled, remembering the feel of the keys as she moved through the crowd. The atmosphere changed dramatically. Just minutes ago, people had been pulling their expensive coats and dresses away from her, afraid her cart would brush against them. Now, they were partying like the Red Sea to let her through. They weren't moving out of fear or disgust. They were moving out of reverence. A man in a tuxedo, who had been sipping a cocktail and looking bored earlier, reached out and gently touched her shoulder as she passed. He started, then stopped, unable to find the right words. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." "Thank you." Alina looked at him, surprised. She saw a genuine smile on his face. No one had ever looked at her like that in this building. She gave him a small, shy nod and kept walking. A little further on, a woman with diamond earrings stepped into her path. The woman didn't say anything. She just reached out and squeezed Elena's hand. The woman's eyes were shiny with tears. She didn't need to say anything. The squeeze said, "Asterisk, I see you. You matter." Asterisk, these small interactions hit Alina harder than the music had. For years, she had felt invisible. She was the person who cleaned up the spills and emptied the trash. She was part of the background, a piece of furniture that kept the hotel running. But now, she was being seen. She was being treated like a human being with a soul and a gift. It was overwhelming. She felt her throat tighten, threatening to close up with tears, but she swallowed them down. She wouldn't cry. Not here. She finally reached the double doors that led to the service hallway. The noise of the gala faded slightly as she pushed through them. The contrast was immediate. The fancy carpet and chandeliers were gone, replaced by beige concrete walls and fluorescent lights. The air smelled of bleach and dish soap instead of perfume and champagne. This was her world. She leaned back against the heavy metal door for a moment, letting out a long, shaky breath. She looked down at her hands. They were red and rough, just as they had been before she walked onto the stage. But to her, they looked different. They looked capable. The hotel manager came rushing down the hall, his dress shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He looked frantic but happy. He spotted Alina standing there and hurried over. "Lena," he said, his voice echoing. I don't even know what to say. The guests are going crazy." Alina pushed herself off the door and stood up straight, slipping back into her work persona. "I am sorry, sir," she said softly. "I did not mean to cause a scene. I will go back to the kitchen now. Sorry." The manager laughed, a bright, genuine laugh. "Alina, you didn't cause a scene. You saved the night. Half the people in there are asking for your name." Alina looked down at her shoes. "It was just a song, sir. I used to play a long time ago." "Well, you certainly haven't forgotten how," the manager said. He looked at her with a new kind of respect. He had always known she was a good worker, reliable, quiet, and fast. But he had never looked at her as an artist. He felt a twinge of guilt for all the times he had walked past her without a second glance. "Listen," he said, his voice turning serious. "The owner is here? He wants to meet you." Lena's head snapped up. "The owner? Mr. Sterling?" "Yes. He was in the front row. He wants to talk to you in the private lounge." Alina felt a spike of panic. "Oh no, sir. I can't. Look at me." She gestured to her uniform. "I am a mess. I smell like lemon cleaner. I can't go talk to the owner." The manager softened his voice. "Alina, right now, you are the most important person in this hotel. Mr. Sterling doesn't care about your uniform. He cares about the music. Please, just come and say hello." Lena hesitated. Every instinct told her to run. Her job was to be invisible, not to mingle with billionaires. But the manager was looking at her with such insistence, and she remembered the feeling of the piano keys under her fingers. She remembered the feeling of being truly alive. Maybe, just this once, she shouldn't hide. "Okay," she whispered, "but only for a minute." The manager led her down the hallway to a set of mahogany doors. He knocked, and a deep voice from inside said, "Come in." They walked into a private lounge that was smaller than the ballroom, but much more elegant. There was a bar, a fireplace, and soft leather chairs. Sitting on one of the chairs was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and a kind face. This was Mr. Sterling, the man who owned the hotel. Standing next to the window, looking out at the city, was a young man holding a microphone and a large camera on his shoulder. "Ah, here she is," Mr. Sterling said, standing up with a smile. He didn't offer his hand to be kissed or shake it. He walked over to Alina and gently took her rough, calloused hand in both of his. "I am Arthur," he said simply. "That was the most extraordinary thing I have witnessed in my own hotel in 20 years. Alina didn't know what to do. She felt out of place. "Thank you," she stammered. "I hope I didn't ruin your party." "Ruin it?" Arthur laughed. "You electrified it. I have seen the best pianists in the world play in that ballroom. Some of them had more technique, perhaps, but none of them had what you have. None of them had that. That story inside the music." He turned to the young man with the camera. "This is David from the local news. He was here to cover the gala, but I think we both know what the real story is tonight, don't we?" David stepped forward, lifting the camera to his shoulder. A small light on top of the camera turned on. "Hi, Elena," he said warmly. "I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions. We'd love to share your story with the city. People need to see this." Elena blinked as the bright camera light hit her face. She felt a moment of pure terror. The camera lens looked like a giant eye judging her. She thought about her kids at home, asleep. She thought about her neighbors, her coworkers, her life. If she did this, nothing would ever be the same. The invisibility cloak she had worn for so long would be gone forever. She looked at Mr. Sterling, was watching her with an encouraging nod. She looked at the manager, who was smiling proudly. Then she looked at the camera. She thought about the look on Julian's face when she started playing. She thought about the silence in the room before the applause. She took a deep breath. She thought about all the years she had spent in the shadows cleaning up other people's messes. She realized that she didn't have to hide anymore. She had a gift, and it was wrong to keep it buried. "Yes," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly, but getting stronger with every word. "I will talk. But first, I need to wash my hands." "Ah!" David lowered the camera for a second and laughed. "You can wash your hands later, Elena. You're perfect just the way you are." Elena looked down at her simple dress and her worn shoes. She didn't feel perfect, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was enough. She stood up straighter, looked into the camera lens, and prepared to tell the world not just how she played the piano, but why she had to stop, and how music never truly leaves you. The cleaning lady was gone, and the artist had finally arrived. The bright red light on the camera flickered on, casting a glow in the quiet lounge. Elena stood near the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her apron. She felt small and exposed, but the man behind the camera, David, smiled warmly. He didn't rush her. He waited for her to breathe. "Tell us your name," David said gently. "And tell us, how long has it been since you played like that?" Elena looked at the lens, then over at Mr. Sterling, who nodded encouragingly. "My name is Elena," she began, her voice soft but steady. "And it has been 30 years. Maybe since I left my home country." She went on to tell a story that wasn't just about music, but about survival. She spoke of a young girl who loved the piano more than anything in the world. She practiced on a broken instrument in a dusty room, dreaming of concert halls. But then, life got in the way. Her parents got sick. Money ran out. She had to make a choice. Keep chasing a dream that might never happen, or put food on the table for her family. She chose her family. She came to this country, worked 2 jobs, cleaned floors until her back ached, and slowly, the piano became just a memory she kept locked in her heart. "I never touched a piano all those years," Elena said, looking down at her rough hands. "I was afraid. I thought if I touched one, the music would be gone. Or worse, I would realize I was never good enough to begin with." The room was silent. Tonight, when that man on stage made fun of me, it hurt, but it also woke something up. I realized that respect isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It is about what is inside you. I looked at the piano and I didn't see a machine. I saw an old friend I had missed for a very long time. David lowered the camera, his eyes shining. "That was incredible, Elena, thank you." Mr. Sterling stood up. He walked over to Elena, but this time he didn't shake her hand. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to her. "Tonight you gave my guests something money cannot buy," Mr. Sterling said seriously. "You reminded them what passion looks like. This is a check. It is enough to pay for a very nice piano in your home and to pay for your rent for a year. I want you to play, Elena. I want you to find that music again." Elena's hands trembled as she took the envelope. She didn't look inside. She just looked at the man, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Mr. Sterling smiled. "Just promise you won't wait another 30 years. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, but things were different. The local news ran the story of the cleaning lady pianist. It wasn't just a small clip on the TV. It spread everywhere. People shared it on their phones, on their computers, and over their morning coffee. The video of Elena sitting in her blue uniform, playing with such fury and grace, made people stop and stare. It had over 1 million views before noon. In the hotel, the atmosphere had changed too. The staff walked a little taller. They looked at Elena differently. They saw her not just as a coworker, but as a hero. She was given the day off, but she didn't go home to sleep. She had things to do. She took the bus to a music store in the center of the city. It was a place she had walked past 1,000 times, but never dared to enter. The bells above the door chimed as she walked in. The smell of wood and wax filled the air. Rows of pianos lined the walls, uprights, grands, digitals. A salesman in a slick suit walked over, looking at her uniform. He was about to tell her this wasn't a place to hang out, but then he stopped. He recognized her. He saw the face from the news. "Are you Alina?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. She smiled. "Yes, I am looking for a piano. Something for a small apartment, but something good." For the next hour, Alina played piano after piano. She didn't care about the price tags the salesman showed her. She only cared about the touch. She played Chopin. She played Bach. She played the simple folk songs from her childhood. She felt the calluses on her fingers rub against the ivory, and she didn't feel ashamed. She felt proud. She finally chose a beautiful, upright piano. It was black and shiny, just like the one at the gala. She arranged for it to be delivered that afternoon. When she got home to her small apartment, her grandchildren were there. They had seen the video on their mother's phone. They looked at their grandmother with wide eyes, as if she had suddenly turned into a superhero. "Grandma, play for us?" The little one shouted. Alina laughed, a sound that came from deep in her belly, a sound she hadn't made in years. She moved a chair out of the way to make space for the new instrument. When the delivery men brought it in and set it up, the room felt complete. It felt like a piece of the puzzle had been found. She sat down on the bench. It was her bench now. Not a hotel's bench, not a stage's bench, hers. "What do you want to hear?" she asked them. "The fast one?" The oldest boy cheered. "The angry one?" Alina smiled. She placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't think about Julian Vane. She didn't think about the humiliation or the applause. She just played. The music filled the small apartment, bouncing off the walls and mixing with the laughter of her family. It was loud and joyful. Meanwhile, across town, Julian was in his apartment. He was pacing back and forth. The reviews of the gala were coming out in the newspapers and online. He read them one by one, his face getting darker with every word. "A touching surprise from a hidden talent," one headline read. "Julian Vane, upstaged by a cleaner," another one said. He threw his phone onto the couch. He felt angry. He felt robbed. But deep down, underneath the ego and the pride, he felt something else. He felt afraid. He watched the video of Alina playing again. He watched the way her eyes closed, the way she poured her heart into every note. He looked at his own hands. They were smooth, soft, and manicured. He realized he had been playing the notes perfectly for years, but he had forgotten the music. He had forgotten how to feel it. He was a technician, not an artist. The woman he made fun of was the artist. Julian walked over to his own grand piano in the corner of his living room. It was worth more than Elaine's entire apartment building. He sat down. He lifted his hands to play a scales like he did every morning, but he stopped. He couldn't do it. It felt empty. He remembered what Alina had said on the stage. Asterisk, the piano is the only thing in this room that doesn't need cleaning. It needs soul. Asterisk, Julian sat there for a long time, just looking at the keys. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to play. He realized he had a lot to learn. He closed his eyes, trying to find a feeling, any feeling, that wasn't just pride. It was going to be a long, hard road to get his music back. Days turned into weeks. Elena's life changed in ways she never expected. She didn't become a famous concert pianist touring the world that is a fairy tale. But she did start teaching. Parents in the neighborhood brought their children to her apartment. They wanted their kids to learn from the woman who played with so much heart. She taught them that the notes were just letters, but the playing was the language. She taught them that it didn't matter if you wore a tuxedo or a cleaning uniform. What mattered was the respect you gave to the instrument. Sometimes, in the evenings, after her students left and the dishes were washed, Alina would sit at her piano. The city lights would twinkle outside her window. She would play a soft, quiet melody, thinking about the night she shocked everyone. She would think about Julian. She didn't hate him. In fact, she felt a little sorry for him. He had everything money could buy, but he had lost the one thing that made it all worth it. She hoped that one day he would find his music again. Alina struck the final chord of the evening. She let the sound fade into silence. She looked at her hands. the hands that had scrubbed floors and touched the hearts of millions. She smiled a peaceful, happy smile. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was Alina the pianist. And she was finally home.